There is a free agent target I want to discuss on today's episode, and that is Tee Higgins. We've talked about Higgins a little bit on the channel, but a new report, some new, rumors have come out surrounding Higgins and his future, whether it's with Cincinnati or another team, that I want to share with you guys because Diana Russini from The Athletic put this out there. When talking about the Bengals, she said, if they fail to come to an agreement, it's likely the Patriots, Panthers, Commanders, or Broncos are willing to meet Higgins' demand. For any of those quarterbacks, he would provide a desperately needed passing option. I don't like that desperately needed passing option. Are we going to forget, like, Courtland Sutton just had a phenomenal season? Marvin Mims ended the year on a high note. That seems like a select and apply to all when that's not. Also, the Commanders, we got Terry McLaurin there. So this seems like a little bit of a stretch. But anywho, I digress. Higgins, let's talk about T because he is a very good receiver. I'm not here to try and say he's not. I'm not here to try and argue whether or not Higgins is a good overall football player. There is plenty to like about him, but there is also not plenty, but grave or big enough concerns to wonder, is he worth a monster contract? I think it's also important to look at this a few steps removed. This is a weak NFL draft class when it comes to the wide receiver position, which is great news for wide receivers in free agency because any team looking to make a bit of a splash upgrade at that spot, their usual first line of thinking is, how about the draft? It's cheaper than free agency, and they're younger and more long-term. But this is not a good year to turn to the draft to fix any wide receiver needs, which is the best news in the world for free agent receivers this year because that means they've got a little bit more leverage when they go to the negotiating table going, well, what are your options? You're going to pass on me and draft a bad receiver? I don't think so. Which is why I think Higgins is probably going to net something like this in, we can put his contract up real quickly here, something like this in NFL free agency. A 4-year, $115 million contract. That would make him the 7th highest paid receiver in football at an average of $28.75 million. Higgins knows this is not a very good draft class. To kind of take that one step further, not just give you my opinion on it, Dane Brugler from The Athletic, he's one of my favorite NFL draft gurus to follow. He recently put out his top 100 prospects. There are 5 wide receivers that cracked his top 50. Last year, he had 11 in the top 50. In fact, he's never had as low of 5 in the top 50 going back 4 seasons from now. 8, 8, 6, and 5. This is not a good year if you need a receiver to find one in the draft. It's slim pickings there, which is, like I said, great news for Higgins, but that means his price just went exponentially up. And that's where I start to have a concern. And I'll expand on that in just a second. But the pinned comment for today's episode is, would you sign Tee Higgins? If you're George Payton, you're Sean Payton, and Tee Higgins' agent calls you directly and says, Higgins wants to be a Bronco, we want that $28.75 million on average. Are you in or are you out? For me, for what he is likely going to command in free agency, if I'm the Broncos, I'm not interested for that price for some of the concerns I have. Age, not a huge concern. I think he still has some really good football in front of him. For me, it's more about the lack of availability. $28.75 million is a major investment. And if that investment misses 5 games a year, like Higgins has done the past 2 seasons, it starts to scream Randy Gregory all over again. Higgins is better than Gregory was going into free agency. But man, 10 missed games over the last 2 years for a nearly $29 million investment, that's maybe a little bit too rich and a little bit too risky for what I think is already a good young receiver room. Courtland Sutton, Devon Vele, Marvin Mims. 2 of those guys are in their first or second season now, or going into year 3 like Mims. Troy Franklin as a rookie showed a lot of growth from week 1 when he wasn't even on the field to being a big part of this passing attack the last couple of weeks of the season. And starting the playoff game off on a high note against Buffalo. Marvin Mims is someone, though, I think can really take a huge step forward in year 3. Look at the way Mims ended the season compared to the way he started it. 434 yards and 6 touchdowns in the last third-ish of the NFL season. Yeah, I think Mims has a lot more potential to him, and we're just scratching the surface. So instead of spending a lot on Tee Higgins, I'd rather roll with the current receiving core. You can make some low-ish level additions, like the way they signed Josh Reynolds last year. It was not a blockbuster move. Fortunately, it didn't really work out for him in Denver because of the injury and then the shooting. It just kind of kept him off the field too much. But overall, I know that it's fun to go out there and just say a bunch of marquee free agent and draft names. But I also think you should look at the way the Eagles and the Chiefs have kind of compiled their rosters as, hey, those are some good blueprints to follow. And they invested in the trenches. Like, that was the first and foremost investment they made. Offensive line, defensive line. And the Broncos have a good offense and defensive line, but I'd rather see resources allocated elsewhere and bank on this young, up-and-coming receiving core to maybe turn into, not quite Tee Higgins level, but 75-80% of Tee Higgins for $25 million less. Take that $25 million in savings and throw it at a different position group that you need much more help at than wide receiver. Before we talk about some of those other wide receiver targets the Broncos could go after instead of T, make sure to follow the channel here. We've got a lot of content coming your way leading up to NFL free agency. I've been doing my absolute best to give you guys not just one video a day, but 2 videos a day sometimes. So if you're looking for a free daily Broncos YouTube channel, I invite you to scroll on down and click that subscribe button. So if it's not Tee Higgins, what about this? Elijah Moore. The Browns wide receiver who was a second-round draft pick by the Jets, traded to Cleveland, just didn't really have a role in that Jets offense, and I think that's more of a mistake by New York than Elijah Moore not living up to the billing. This past season for Cleveland, 538 yards, 1 touchdown. That does not jump off the page to you. This is probably someone that people will overlook because of the lack of production. I see a player who kind of got lost in the shuffle of the Browns quarterback carousel, from Watson not playing well to Jameis Winston to Dorian Thompson-Robinson to Bailey Zappi starting at the end of the season. You got 4 different starting quarterbacks. Jameis probably the best of the bunch, but he threw to the other team nearly as much as he threw to his own team. And I think Moore still has a really good upside to his game, and he kind of fits a little bit of what Denver's passing attack is missing. Sutton is your glue guy, right? Sutton is someone who can run any route tree out there, and he can possess the ball over the middle of the field. He can extend the field for you as well. He doesn't stand out at any one spot, but he definitely doesn't lack in any one spot. So you got Sutton, who's kind of your do-it-all X receiver. Marvin Mims is your vertical threat. He is your Z-type receiver. But I think Elijah Moore, he can be a little bit more of a gadget-type guy. Not quite a joker like Sean Payton wants, but not too far off of it, where you can line up in the backfield. You can use him on end-arounds and things like that. And you can just overall add more speed to your wide receiver room. I think Moore would be a good target for the Broncos to look at. When it comes to the draft, if you want to know about who could they find in the draft that's not going to be a first, a second, or maybe a third-round draft pick, I'm looking at TCU's wide receiver, Jack Bech. He started off at LSU. He transfers to the Horned Frogs, and he puts up 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns this past season in Fort Worth. I like his game because I wouldn't say it reminds me of Ladd McConkey, but similar-esque to Ladd McConkey, where, I don't think, maybe not a great comparison, but, Jack Bech is not going to blow you away with his physical traits. But he's going to do the nitty-gritty stuff right. And I think that's going to pay off early in his career. He's someone who's going to get in there and run block, something that we never talk about when evaluating receivers. But if half the plays are run plays and your wide receiver is not making much of an effort out there, half of the time they're on the field, they are not a productive member of the team. You go back to his entire career in college, like I said, started off at LSU and then a big breakout season this past year for the Horned Frogs. This is someone who I think could be a fun pick in round number 4, who can just kind of fill the gaps a little bit with his versatility in this receiver room. To wrap up today's episode, I love to do this now. Name a random Broncos wide receiver. I'm going to think of one. I'm going to say who I'm thinking of. I want to see if you say the same person. I still got to think of mine, though. Usually I premeditate it, but today I just kind of want to raw dog it. I don't want to go any basic ones either. I'm trying to dig a little bit. I got one. I think I already said him a few weeks ago. All right, here we go. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Cody Latimer. Second round draft pick. Did not work out. Cody Latimer. Let me know if you said the same guy in the comment section below or who your random Broncos wide receiver is. But that will do it for us on today's episode. Make sure you scroll on down. Click the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe as well. And I'll see everyone tomorrow.